It's now that time of year, the end of the year, and it's time to count down my favorite games of 2024. This year has been a solid year for video games. You'll see people saying that this was a bad year for the industry, and it certainly was, but for video games themselves, we got some really good bangers, which made this list very difficult. Now, obviously, this is my opinion. This is not a definitive list of the best games of the year. It's just my favorite of the year. Also, it's only games I played. The games you see on screen, like the titles, I've never got a chance to play them, whether it be because they don't interest me, they're on my backlog, or whatever. And also, no DLC, so, you know, Shadow of the Erdtree's not making this list. And also, I will be including remakes, but only if they do enough different from the original, but no remasters. And in the case of a game like Sonic X Shadow Generations, remaster or not, one of my favorite games of the year, I'm not including it because while half the game is a great new game, the other half is a remaster. I guess it gets an honorable mention, though. Anyways, here we go. Hi guys, DPX here, and welcome to my top 10 favorite games of 2024. Now before we get started, you know what to do. Be sure to like this video, subscribe, and hit the bell, leave a comment, or I will pour salt in your eyes.
I wanted to give to you, the last part of your notes here, the significance spiritually of the number 10 in the Bible.
I am of the opinion that live service games are one thing hurting the industry right now. They're all games where companies look at Fortnite and Overwatch and say like, yeah, let's do that. But then they just don't really know how to do it right. Concord. And that is why I am shocked to see a game like Helldivers 2 on this list. This game took over the world by storm, and I was against it at first, but it ended up being way better than I expected. Helldivers 2 is probably the most fun you can have in a multiplayer game this year. Teaming up with other players to defeat enemies is just very fun. Not to mention, unlike a lot of live service games, Helldivers 2 manages to not launch at full price, yet still comes with a satisfying amount of content along with consistent updates since launch. It managed to stay relevant even after Sony tried to kill it with the PSN account bullshit. Not to mention the presentation of the game and the soundtrack, Helldivers 2 is a shockingly good game. Let's face facts, this wasn't really Nintendo's year. Not that it was a particularly bad year for them, as they did put out some decent titles, but none were really, like, you know, heavy hitters that made it onto this list. Except for Super Mario Party Jamboree. I know I mentioned that Helldivers 2 is probably the most fun you can have with a multiplayer game this year, but Mario Party offers a different kind of fun. The fun that ruins friendships, if you know what I mean. There really is so much to Jamboree. The boards and mini-games are great, some returning, some new, but it all works. And there is more. More mini-games, more characters, and more modes. There's the regular Mario Party mode, of course, but then there's Koopathlon. There's Bowser Kaboom Squad, Rhythm Kitchen, and even a story mode with Party Planner Trek. And there's many more that add new variety to the content on display. Not to mention how good the game looks, and Super Mario Party Jamboree is not only hands down the best Mario Party on the Switch, it might just be the best Mario Party ever. We go from the best Mario Party game to perhaps the best Dragon Ball game, with Dragon Ball Sparking Zero. The long-awaited new entry in the Budokai Tenkaichi series, Dragon Ball Sparking Zero is an absolute banger. A roster of 182 characters, yeah you heard me, 182, and that's not even counting the DLC characters. And sure, a lot of the characters are different versions of other characters. For example, there's Goku from one show, and Goku from another show. But still, Sparking Zero takes characters from all over the Dragon Ball lexicon, and throws them together in an epic arena fighter. Not to mention, the episode battles are fucking awesome. They are what-if scenarios from the show that are very interesting, to say the least. I don't want to spoil what happens, but they're very interesting. And sure, the game might be difficult, but that makes it all the more rewarding when you finally win. I'm looking at you, Grade 8 Vegeta, fuck you. Simply put, Dragon Ball Sparking Zero is a love letter to Dragon Ball fans.
36.
Very close, but that's not it. Let's go to Gary the Retard. What number between 2 and 4?
Stellar Blade. I like it because of the gameplay. All jokes aside, the combat in Stellar Blade feels very satisfying and rewarding. It's fast and flashy, and parrying is so cool too. There are tons of new abilities that you unlock throughout the game as well, even as late as 20 hours in, which some might take issue with it. But I think freshening things up that late into the game is awesome. Not to mention, Stellar Blade takes place in a post-apocalyptic world, which is, nothing new. But it also takes place in a semi-open world with a beautiful aesthetic. And the music goes hard too, providing a mix of metal, techno, and K-pop, which sounds like it shouldn't work, but it really does. And my god, those boss fights. Especially when you get towards the end of the game, Stellar Blade gives you some of the coolest boss fights you will play all year. They are challenging, but I never thought it was bullshit. Whenever I died, I felt like it was something I did wrong. Not to mention, Eve. She has a very nice sword. All that and more makes Stellar Blade one hell of a banger.
Okay, Mrs. Puff, what's my final score?
6. Woo! Atlas had a really solid year this year. I didn't play Unicorn Overlord or SMT5 Vengeance, but I've heard nothing but fantastic things about them. And Persona 3 Reload is a fantastic and faithful remake, and it almost made the list. But in my personal opinion, their best game of the year, without question, is Metaphor ReFantazio. The best way I could describe Metaphor is Fantasy Persona. Now, a lot of people take issue with the Persona comparisons, but I mean it in the best way possible, especially since it might even be better than Persona. Metaphor ReFantazio has amazing turn-based combat with a great cast of characters, and you can change a character's class. What I mean is, you can change a character from, a fighter, to a brawler, to a healer, to a brute, etc., and all because of the archetypes. I'm sorry to bring up Persona again, but the archetypes in Metaphor kind of work like the Personas, except I think they are much more fleshed out and can do a whole lot more. Not to mention the story and how it tackles the subject of war, and particularly preventing it, is a great message that I feel we don't get a whole lot of. And my god, that music. The song you're hearing right now, that's the normal battle theme. They went that hard on a song that plays during a random enemy encounter. Some of you might be surprised that Metaphor isn't even in the top 5, and honestly, it would be, but I got the game a lot later than its release, which means I started it late, which means I haven't played enough of it, so I don't think it can go higher. But regardless, Metaphor ReFantazio is a masterpiece, and not just metaphorically.
Oh, chills. Literal chills.
It was number 5. Number 5 killed my brother.
Oh my god, I forgot about that.
I was really excited for Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, as I have a soft spot for the Indiana Jones movies, and the game looked freaking awesome leading up to release. But even considering that, everything I just said, I was not expecting it to place this high, but lo and behold, Indiana Jones and the Great Circle is amazing. I know it's cliche, but Indiana Jones and the Great Circle really makes you feel like Indiana Jones. Stuff like cracking your whip just works so well in this game. Not to mention there are stealth sections in the Great Circle as well that I also really dug. Additionally, Troy Baker as Indiana Jones is just perfection. If I didn't know any better, I would think it was Harrison Ford playing Indy. That is a great performance if I've ever seen it. Not to mention the perfect score, stunning visuals, and a fantastic story with a villain that manages to be the perfect foil for Indy. Simply put, Indiana Jones and the Great Circle is a must-get for Xbox. Or at least it would be if it wasn't also coming to PS5 later on, but either way, this game is great. Fighting games are really in a renaissance period right now. Last year we got both Street Fighter 6 and Mortal Kombat 1, and next year we're getting a new Fatal Fury along with 2XKO. But as for this year, we had games like the Marvel vs. Capcom Collection and the aforementioned Sparking Zero, but the real fighting game of the year is Tekken 8. Where to even begin? Tekken 8 has an amazing roster of characters from all throughout Tekken. It's more fun than it's ever been, and looks way better too. Not to mention the costumes, and specifically the custom costumes, these go wild. But then Tekken 8 has its story, in which the lore of this franchise is pretty deep, but the story is more epic with a climactic battle between Jin and Kazuya. Also, did I mention the roster? The characters are so much fun, whether it be Yoshimitsu, King, or Steve, some of my favorites, along with newcomers like Reyna. The online works amazingly too. There is even like a hub world you run around in to find matches, which I always love, and my god, that soundtrack is fucking fire. Simply put, Tekken 8 is further proof that fighting game fans are eating good. I know I mentioned that Helldivers 2 and Indiana Jones ended up being way better than expected, but when it comes to the Silent Hill 2 remake, I was cautiously optimistic, but there were a lot of warning signs with that game that luckily didn't matter because not only did it make my list, but this high. The original Silent 2 is an absolute classic, and the remake doesn't try to replace it. It just reinvents it. Pretty much the story is the same as the original, but the gameplay is very different. Specifically, there is a bit more of an emphasis on combat, which I wasn't entirely sure about at first, but after playing it, it works tremendously. Not to mention, all the enemies look as terrifying as ever, having multiple endings is always a treat, Pyramid Head makes my pants brown, and the audio design in this game I feel should have landed an award. Silent Hill 2 Remake is one of the best video game remakes out there, and not because it's better than the original or it's trying to replace the original, but because it's trying to reinvent a classic and does so damn well.
What kind of pencil do we take again?
Number 2. Take a number 2.
Looks like you took a big number 2.
So if you know me and have been following games I've reviewed this year and have heard me talk about my possible game of the year, you might know that I was not quite sure what my game of the year is. Two games that I love almost equally as much for almost complete opposite reasons, but I had to put one of them at number 2 and one of them at number 1. So with that being said, I have never felt so bad for putting a game at number 2 as I do for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. My god, this game is everything I ever wanted from a follow-up to Final Fantasy VII Remake. It continues retelling the story of the original FF7, but at this point, I just can't call it a remake. It has way too many new mechanics and story elements to really be a remake. But either way, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is an absolute masterclass, a sight to behold. The combat in the game, some people take issue with it, but I think it is fun and satisfying. But then you get an open world. Looks absolutely unbelievable, and yes, on a base PS5, it might leave a little to be desired for some people, but for me, I don't care. I think it looks out of this world. And then there's the story. Again, it loosely follows the original, but everything with Aerith, if you know, you know, I think is done extremely well while still leaving some questions unanswered. And even other characters like Barret, Tifa, Red 13, and of course Cloud, and hell yes, Sephiroth even, get fleshed out. And it almost goes without saying, but the soundtrack. That's it, the soundtrack. Goes without saying. I respect other people's opinions, but I can't get behind it when people say that FF7 Rebirth is a disappointment, because I think number 2 is too low for it. Now before we get to number 1, let's take a look at some honorable mentions.
I'm a Luigi, number 1.
So obviously just before the honorable mentions, I really praised Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and for a while, it was my game of the year. But one game came out and beat it by the smallest pixel on your screen, and that game is none other than Astrobot. A game that sorta came out of nowhere, but my god, it had me smiling ear to ear from beginning to end. Astrobot is a 3D platformer, a genre of game we don't get too often. But in my review for the game, I said it was like PlayStation Smash Bros. No, not that one. But it's a platformer and you just play as one character. And that's because Astrobot is a celebration of not just PlayStation, but video games as a whole. Throughout the game, you rescue bots, and a lot of them are other video game characters heavily associated with PlayStation, characters like Crash, Spyro, Nathan Drake, Kratos, Solid Snake. The more obscure and forgotten franchises like Wild Arms, Mr. Mosquito, and even my boy Gex, to even recently adding in Spider-Man and Miles Morales. What about the actual game? Well, Astrobot is a 3D platformer, as I mentioned, and you travel to many worlds. Each world has a level you play through, and each level could have a cool new ability, a great aesthetic, or even be from other games like Uncharted, God of War, or Horizon. I don't know how else to explain that last part, but just trust me. Moving around feels so nice, finding exploits in the levels is satisfying, and did I mention that Astrobot is just joyful? If you want to be in a good mood, play Astrobot. With everything wrong with the gaming industry today, I mean it when I say that Astrobot is everything right with the gaming industry today. Not to mention, I did something I rarely do with games, and I think this is the real reason it ended up being at number 1. I went back to 100% Astrobot, and I'm not quite there yet, I don't have the platinum, but I went back and rescued every single bot, unlocked every single puzzle piece, and unlocked and beat every single secret level in the game. Astrobot is a game we do not deserve, and that is why it is my number 1 favorite game of 2024. So that's my list of the best games of 2024. Sorry, I don't know if this might come out a bit later than I was expecting because I'm having some problems with my computer, but either way, that'll do it for this video. What do you guys think? Do you guys agree with my list? Any games I left out? I know certain games like Black Myth Wukong or Balatro or Space Marine 2 or like a Dragon, those aren't on the list, but let me know what you guys think. Anyways, this will probably most likely be my last video of the year, and this was a good year for me in this channel. We're almost at 1,000 subscribers, let's get it up there, and just thanks for watching me this year, and I'll be back next year with some more content. Take care, everyone.